The name is Zella Vandervoort. I served in the U.S. Army active duty for 8.5 years and the active reserves for the rest of my 22 years.
And then what made you decide to join the military?
That would be, I was tired of school. I didn't want to go to college, and I wanted to leave home, not to say that home life wasn't good, but I wanted adventure. And so I joined the Army and spent a year and a half going to school.
Cool. So when you initially were shipped out and went to basic training, did your experiences at basic training change your initial thoughts you had? Like, were you starting to question whether or not this was a good idea?
No, I still thought it was a good idea, but it was absolutely a horrible experience for me because I was a bookworm, I wasn't athletic, I was extremely shy, and here I was mixing in with all these people that I didn't know, having to do physical exercise that I'd never done before. It was a real trial for me. But once I was out of basic, then my next school was more academic, so I was fine.
Did you do any specific job in the military or in the Army, or was it just like overall?
So I was enlisted, and when you go in enlisted, you always have a specific job. If you go in as an officer, then you're trained as a manager and you can hop around. You may be trained in a certain skill, but that doesn't mean you'll work in that job field. So I was enlisted, and when I originally went in, I was a voice intercept operator, which meant that I listened. And so I went to school for a year for language, and then another 3 months of getting my technical training.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Was there anything about being on active duty that you found the most memorable or the most, like that you keep with you the most?
You know, on active duty, yeah, I loved, and I think it's the same kind of idea for people that go to college and live in the dorms. I loved the whole community, the feeling of community. I loved, you were independent. Once you got out of basic and out of your schooling and got into your actual job and lived in the barracks, you were, as long as you were at your job or where you were supposed to be at the time you were supposed to be, you were independent. But at the same time, you had all these other people around you, so it was almost like living in a commune. And I missed that. I really loved it. And also I loved that feeling of having a job that meant something. And then, you know, in my experiences over 20-something years are far different. So when you first get in and you're a private, yeah, you're independent, but there's always somebody to tell you what to do. And then as you progress, you go up in rank, then it's you telling other people what to do. So it's nice because you have the familiar, but at the same time, you're moving up and your role is changing.
Way cool, way cool. Where were some of your stations? Like, where did you go within the U.S. or even outside of there?
Well, my schooling was Monterey, California, and then my first assignment was in Misawa, Japan. That's the northernmost tip of the main island of Japan. Then I came back and did a year at Fort Hood, Texas. And then I went back to Monterey, California for another year of language. And then I went to Berlin, Germany for 3.5 years. And that was the end of my active duty. Then when I got off of active, I came to Minnesota and joined the active reserves. And my job changed there. I was still a linguist, but what I did changed. I went to Korea in the active reserves, and I also went to Suriname, South America. With a,
Just for some clarification, what does it mean to be on active duty versus being in active reserves?
so active duty, you are in the military 24/7. You live in the barracks. Those are the people that do the job all the time. In the active reserves, well, it's changed a lot, even since I've left, but primarily, for instance, when I joined the active reserves, which would have been in 1989, you were expected 1 weekend a month to drill, as it was called, and that's where you did your training and any paperwork, stuff like that. So you did that once a month. And then 2 weeks during the summer, and it was always 2 weeks during the summer, you did your 2 weeks of more training. And this could be, you could be sent to a school, you could be sent overseas to work with an active duty unit to hone your skills that way, or you could go do an exercise for 2 weeks. The military would run these huge exercises and do, enemy, you could be an enemy force or you could be a U.S. force, and you would do your job that you were trained for in this mock, battle or whatever. So, so that's what happened that's the way it was when I first joined the reserves. By the time I got out of the reserves, it was, we were deploying. Desert Storm had happened, the first one had happened. We were in Afghanistan, we were in Bosnia-Herzegovina. My unit was in Gitmo, which is Guantanamo Bay. So instead of doing your 2 weeks and your 1 weekend a month, you were deploying for 9 months, a year at a time.
Okay. How does when you're in a unit, how does that deployment work? Like, so if you were in active reserves but part of your unit was being deployed, how do they choose whether or not you go?
Well, a prime example is Desert Storm, the first one. So my unit, in the active reserves, I was an interrogator. But being female, and I would have been working with Muslims, my unit left all the women behind. Now you've got to remember this is the early 90s by then. And so all the women were left behind. All the men in my unit deployed, and that's how it was decided. Now, when a unit deploys, the whole unit deploys. It's not parts of it. Unless you're sick or you're pregnant, something like that, or there's extenuating circumstances like, well, actually, I'm not quite sure what that would be anymore because, they require, if you're a single parent, you sign paperwork giving the care of your child or children to somebody else before you even, even if you're not activated, that's in your record, so that if you are activated, there's a guardian for your children. So even being a single parent is not an excuse to stay behind. So,
how do you think your experiences with the U.S. Army affect like how you live everyday life outside of it now?
I'm a little more cynical than I was when I first went into the military. I think I have more confidence than I had before, definitely. But, some of that could be just age. I know that it was an adjustment when I first was, when I first worked with volunteers or worked with, being in charge of somebody, I have a hard time, I had a hard time being in charge of people in the civilian world, because in the military there's no asking. You're told to do something and it's expected. There's no discussion, you just do it. Now as you get higher in rank, that might change a little. Two high-ranking people might actually discuss whether or not, but definitely sergeant to private or something like that. And in the civilian world, that's not necessarily how it works. Also, I like structure, which again, it's hard, when you go in at 18, and you spend 22 years doing something, it's hard to say whether that forms all of you or whether part of your personality, has always been that way. I love structure. Was that the military or who I am now just because I would have been that way anyway? I don't know. But I think I'm more prepared to react to emergencies, stuff like that.